The Philippine government and the Communist Party agreed to resume peace talks after a 6-year hiatus. Successful negotiations could lead to an end to one of Asia's longest communist insurgencies.
The peace negotiations come less than a week after Philippine President Marcos Jr. issued an order granting amnesty to several rebel groups. CNA's Buena Bernal has more.
The National Democratic Front of the Philippines, or NDFP, a communist movement designated by the Philippine government as a terror organization, announced on Tuesday that it intends to soon resume peace talks with the Philippine government after on-and-off negotiations for over 30 years now. Peace talks, the group said, are likely to start in 2024. The NDFP counts as its members the Communist Party of the Philippines, as well as its armed wing, the New People's Army, which is responsible for what is widely considered as Asia's longest-running communist insurgency. In a press conference in the Netherlands, NDFP National Executive Committee members announced that a statement of intent was issued last November 23 as a first half-step towards formal negotiations with the Philippine government.
We hope that the needs of the Filipino people will be uppermost in our deliberations.
But to clear the road for negotiations to move forward, NDFP chairperson Juliet de Lima laid out demands for the administration of President Ferdinand Marcos Jr., including number 1, the release of NDFP members currently imprisoned who they say will serve as peace consultants engaged in the negotiations, as well as number 2, the rescinding of the terrorist designation of the NDFP issued during the term of former President Rodrigo Duterte. Now, the panel did not release the names of these consultants they want released, but they said these are critical measures for the peace talks to even proceed. They also asked for the dismantling of a national task force aimed at ending the communist insurgency. This task force has been criticized in the past by the United Nations for tagging civil society organizations as members of the communist insurgency.
We call on all stakeholders and their constituencies to support and push the parties in pursuing the peace negotiations to address the persistence of mass poverty, social inequality, and economic underdevelopment.
It is unclear if the NDFP's demands will be met by the Philippine government. The group is also asking President Marcos Jr. for the release of over 800 political prisoners. Last week, President Marcos Jr. issued a proclamation that granted amnesty to former members of the NDFP for crimes related to the pursuit of their political belief. The government said such a proclamation aims to reintegrate former rebels back to society and is part of the administration's comprehensive peace initiatives. Buena Bernal, CNA, Makati in Metro Manila.
For more, we're joined now by Eduardo Araral. He's Associate Professor at the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy. Good evening, Professor Eduardo. These talks, or the spectre of talks, has gone back and forth for some years. Good evening. Formal talks, though, were last conducted in 2017. They were terminated by Rodrigo Duterte at that time. This is all about reconciliation and healing. What's the significance, though, of this willingness at this point in time, for the government and the rebels to talk peace?
Well, Dawn, as you correctly pointed out, the last 7 presidents of the Philippines always wants to have a talk with the National Democratic Front. And the history of those talks is that they always end up in failure because the terms and conditions by the NDF are not often palatable for the military. For example, the release of their leaders, their prisoners, their aging leadership, for example. Those are very difficult conditions for the military. And the military has always been suspicious of the communist groups about their intentions for these peace talks because the military accuses these groups of just regrouping, rearming, and taking advantage of this peace talks for their gain. And once the officers are released, they go back underground only for the military to. So it will be challenging, but everybody wants to have a peace. And as actually, this is not Asia's longest armed insurgency. If I recall it correctly, this is the world's oldest armed communist insurgency. So in that sense, this is very significant. Hopefully something might come out of this, because the leadership of the communist group, as you can see in the photo, they're past in their prime. They are in their 80s. Their leader has died last year, and they have difficulty recruiting new members. Don.
Professor Eduardo, as you say, it's likely to be challenging for the conditions of these new talks once they do happen, and assuming that they do happen, it might be challenging for them to be fulfilled. What will they rely on, the success of it? What will it rely on as far as you're concerned?
One is, of course, the sincerity of the communist groups to see the conclusion of these peace talks, and not to put up on these difficult conditions that the military will probably disagree with. And President Marcos has to be careful dealing with the military. It's not that it's not only what the president wants, but it's also whether the military would support his decision on this. But maybe they have calculated that the communist groups, especially the armed component, the New People's Army, are already severely weakened during the time of President Duterte. And because the communist groups are already weak, then maybe the government has the upper hand, and this is the time to talk.
It does come at a time when the MPA is diminished as a group. Their strength questionable at this time. But it also comes less than a week after the president issued the order granting amnesty to several rebel groups. What role did that promise of amnesty play in furthering the process of the resumption of this communication with rebel groups?
It's more of a signaling thing, Don, that, to lay down the goodwill, foundations for peace talks. And the other significance of this, Don, is that it was during the time of Marcos Sr., the father of the current President Bongbong Marcos, that the communist insurgency was born and took off in a big way. So maybe President Bongbong Marcos has an eye in history that what his father was not able to finish or to quell, he would be able to do during his term. So maybe he would provide some kind of concessions to the demands of the communist groups that is also palatable to the military. So he has got an eye for history. He is wary of the military, but he will see what the other side also, whether they will come sincerely as they should.
Well, President Marcos Jr. will have several key outcomes that he's hoping for in this process of peace talks with the rebel groups. I mean, he will be also keen to see that the groups don't regroup, as it were, especially in the disadvantaged areas of the country. What chances are there, though, that these groups may find added strength in future? I mean, we talked about them being diminished at this time. Is that something that will hold?
Yeah, so they are now concentrated in a few provinces, unlike in the past where they were still a force to reckon with, but they are just probably a ragtag group, and their leaders the backbone has been broken, and their leaderships has been decimated, and the ideological component is already severely weakened. So the government has the upper hand in this, and and for many young people, their potential recruits is probably a lost cause. It appeals to maybe a smaller segment of rebel-minded young people, but I think it no longer has the appeal and attraction it once had in the 1980s or the 1990s. Although some of the reasons that why they took up arms is still very much valid. Don?
Professor Eduardo, thank you very much for your insights there. Eduardo Araral, Associate Professor at the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy.